December 16th, 1944. Belgium, 4 in the morning. The Ardennes forests are silent. Snow is falling. Soldiers on sentry duty along the American lines stand watch in the freezing cold. The front is quiet. After all, intelligence reports had stated weeks earlier that no major operation is expected in this area. The soldiers want to believe it, because Christmas is approaching, because everyone wants to go home. Then the ground shakes. 2,000 guns open fire simultaneously. The silence of the Ardennes is shattered. German tank columns emerge from behind the fog and snow. 3 armies, 85 divisions, approximately 250,000 soldiers, all surging toward the same point at the same time. The Americans are stunned. Some units disintegrate under the first onslaught. Some positions are surrounded within hours. Communications break down. The chain of command becomes chaotic. Hitler's final gamble has begun. Its name, Operation Autumn Mist. The objective, to split the Allied front in two, retake the port of Antwerp, and turn back the clock. But there is a small American unit in Bastogne, and it is completely surrounded. The German commander sends a message demanding surrender. The reply is one word: nuts. That single word has been etched into memory as one of history's shortest and bravest responses. And the story behind it is one of the most challenging and honorable chapters in the U.S. Army's history during World War II. This battle took place between two opposing forces. On one side, the Allied forces led by the United States, comprising American, British, and Canadian troops. On the other side, Nazi Germany's last major offensive force on the Western Front. Dates: December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945. Duration: 40 days. Location: the Ardennes Forests, a rugged, forested, snow-covered region spanning Belgium, Luxembourg, and Western Germany. This battle was the largest American ground battle on the Western Front during World War II. It was also the battle in which the U.S. Army suffered its heaviest losses of that war. More than 80,000 American soldiers were killed or wounded. A small but important note: the Ardennes had already made history in 1940. That year, the Germans had also marched through this very forest to crush France. In 1944, Hitler used the same route because the Allied commanders weren't expecting it, just as they hadn't in 1940. History repeated itself, but this time, the outcome would be different. Field analysis. The Ardennes, a nightmare for tanks, a hell for infantry. Dense forests, narrow and winding roads, steep valleys. Under winter conditions, this terrain slows down any large-scale operation. No air support, because cloud cover keeps the Air Force grounded. Radar and reconnaissance flights are useless. Everything turns into a blind fight. The Germans deliberately chose this terrain because the only way to neutralize the Allies' air superiority was to create conditions where air forces couldn't fly. The Ardennes winter provided exactly that, but this was also working against the Germans. Tanks were moving through narrow, wooded roads. Resupplying fuel was becoming difficult, and the plan relied heavily on capturing American fuel depots. It was a gamble. Bastogne, however, was a critical junction. 7 major roads in the region passed through this town. Whoever held Bastogne controlled freedom of movement in the area. That is why the Germans had to take Bastogne, and that is why the Americans would not give it up. At first, the geography seemed to favor the Germans in this battle, but when the skies cleared, the balance shifted instantly. Force comparison: when the offensive began, the numbers seemed to favor the Germans, at least at first. On the German side, approximately 250,000 soldiers, 600 tanks and assault guns, and 1,900 artillery pieces. These forces had been moved into the region over the course of months, under strict secrecy. Allied intelligence had failed to detect most of this buildup. On the American side, however, the units at the points where the offensive began were relatively weak. The Ardennes front, known as the Quiet Sector, was being used as a rest area for inexperienced or fatigued units. These units suffered heavy losses in the initial assault, but when looking at the bigger picture, the balance is shifting rapidly. The Allies' total Western Front forces were far larger, Reinforcements were beginning to arrive rapidly, and the most critical difference: supply lines. The Germans were running low on fuel, while the Allies' supply lines were functioning. And here lies the mystery. When Hitler launched this operation, the vast majority of his own generals opposed it. Experienced commanders like Rundstedt and Model argued that the plan was overly ambitious. But Hitler did not listen, because, in his view, the Allies were plagued by internal conflicts and would crumble with a single decisive blow. Was this prediction correct? No. But why did Hitler believe in it so strongly? And why couldn't his generals stop him? The answer to these questions lies in Germany's internal structure at the end of 1944. And this is critical to understanding the fate of the war. Preparation phase and command structure. In this battle, the command structures of both sides are just as fascinating as the battle itself. On the Allied side, General Dwight D. Eisenhower oversees overall coordination. As soon as the initial shock of the offensive subsides, Eisenhower quickly regains his composure and makes a critical decision to withdraw General George S. Patton's Third Army from the French front in the south and redirect it to Bastogne. This decision went down in military history as an unprecedented logistical feat. Patton maneuvered an army of 100,000 men through freezing winter conditions, moving them 150 kilometers overnight and marching them northward within 3 days. No one had ever done this before. Patton had told Eisenhower he would accomplish it in 4 days. He finished 2 days early. Inside Bastogne was General Anthony McAuliffe, commander of the 101st Airborne Division. He was completely surrounded, supply lines cut off, ammunition running low, and the number of wounded rising. And an official surrender message arrived from the German commander. McAuliffe's reply went down in history. Nuts. In Turkish, nonsensenis. Or, to put it more bluntly, forget it. The German messenger had to ask what this response meant. McAuliffe's aide explained, "It means we refuse." On the German side, although Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt had taken overall command, the actual plan had been written by Hitler himself. Von Rundstedt did not believe in the plan. SS General Sepp Dietrich and Panzer Commander Hasso von Manteuffel, however, were the ones doing the heaviest lifting on the ground. Manteuffel, in particular, faced serious challenges in the early days. Chronology of the war. December 16, 1944. The offensive begins. The offensive, launched at 4 a.m. with the fire of 2,000 guns, shocks the American front. The 8th Corps' thin defensive lines are shattered in the first few hours. Some American units are surrounded, others retreat. Communications break down. Chaos spreads. Fog and snow make air support impossible. December 17th to 18th. St. Vith and the First Resistance. Small American units in the town of St. Vith put up an unexpected resistance. This resistance slows the German offensive for days and buys the Allies time to reinforce their positions. Holding St. Vith was one of those decisions that seemed so small, but yielded such significant results. December 19th to 22nd. Bastogne. Under siege. The 101st Airborne Division reaches Bastogne, but just in time. German forces are encircling the town from all sides. Supply lines are cut off. Ammunition is running low. Medical supplies are nearly exhausted. There is no air support because the clouds are still in place. And on December 22nd, a message to surrender arrives. McAuliffe says, "Nuts." December 23rd, the skies clear, a meteorological miracle. The clouds disperse and the skies clear. C-47 planes drop supply airdrops over Bastogne. On the same day, Allied air forces attack German tank columns. The tide begins to turn. December 24th to 25th, the Christmas front. On Christmas Eve, Bastogne is still under siege. American soldiers spend Christmas in their trenches in freezing cold. Years later, when some recount that night, they'll describe a night where no sound could be heard, only snow falling, and everyone thinking of home. But no one gave up. December 26th, Patton's 4th Armored Division reaches Bastogne and breaks the siege. This moment marks the turning point of the battle. Those inside Bastogne say they couldn't put into words what they felt. When they heard the sound of tanks approaching from outside, they simply wept. January 1st to 25th, 1945. The counteroffensive Allied forces launch a counteroffensive. German units, running out of fuel, with supply lines cut off, and now exposed to air attacks, are forced to retreat. By January 25th, the front line returns to its pre-offensive position. Far from winning, the Germans couldn't even return to their starting points. Their losses over 40 days, 30,000 dead, approximately 100,000 total casualties, and irreplaceable equipment, strategic and psychological impacts. The strategic outcome of the Ardennes offensive turned out exactly as Hitler had hoped it would not. Germany exhausted its last reserve armored forces and final fuel stocks in this operation. There was no longer any significant defensive force on the Western Front capable of halting the Allies. By February 1945, the Allies had crossed the Rhine. By March, they were inside Germany. By May, the war was over. In other words, the Ardennes offensive did not prolong Germany's survival. It shortened it. The resources expended left the Eastern Front defenseless as well. When the Soviets launched the Vistula-Oder offensive in January 1945, the German defense effectively collapsed. What would have happened if Hitler had never launched this offensive? If the forces had been preserved and the defensive lines reinforced, perhaps Germany could have held out for a few more months. But the outcome of the war would not have changed. It would simply have lasted longer. From a psychological perspective, the picture is interesting. In the first days of the offensive, there was a serious shock in the American public. Newspaper headlines carried alarming news, but the holding of Bastogne and Patton's rush to the rescue turned that shock into a source of pride. The 101st Airborne Division's resistance in Bastogne became one of the symbols of American military history. The Nuts response, meanwhile, lives on as a brief yet enduring symbol of courage and resolve. For German soldiers, however, the Ardennes marked the moment when even their last hope was extinguished. Many wrote in their diaries during those days, "We know we can no longer win the war. We just don't know when it will end." The Battle of the Ardennes was the final major test on the Western Front of World War II. In this battle, the American army was caught off guard. They were taken by surprise. They were pushed back in the early days, but they did not collapse. And that, not collapsing, is the true story of that battle. The soldiers in Bastogne held out for days without supplies, without air support, and without sufficient ammunition. Patton's army carried out the fastest and most difficult redeployment operation in military history. Eisenhower reorganized command with calmness rather than panic, and Hitler lost his final desperate gamble. Because the most dangerous moment in a gamble is when you sit down at the table with your last chip. From that moment on, the course of the game is no longer in your hands. Every soldier who lost his life in the Ardennes, American, German, British, lies beneath those snows. The cemeteries in Belgium and Luxembourg still welcome visitors today. Elderly veterans return to those lands with their children and grandchildren. Some weep there, without explaining why. This page of history reminds us of this. Even in the darkest night, a single person holding out at a single point can sometimes change the course of history. Bastogne is proof of that. In our next video, we're heading back to the Netherlands, 1944. This time the focus is on a bridge, and the most daring and most controversial airborne operation in history, launched to capture that bridge. 17,000 paratroopers, deep behind enemy lines, and a bridge that required going one step too far to reach. Operation Market Garden. See you in the next video.